There was once a moment when the Buddha sat in quiet reflection, observing the world not through words, but through silence. He understood something that many overlook, that silence holds more value than speech filled with empty words. In the world we live in today, everything moves fast. Conversations never truly end. Thoughts are broadcasted before they are even fully formed, and people share every success, every struggle, every fleeting emotion with those around them. The constant need for validation, for expression, for being heard, has become second nature. And yet, wisdom whispers that not everything is meant to be shared. There are moments, thoughts, and feelings that, when spoken without care, create pain rather than peace, misunderstanding rather than connection. It is easy to fall into the habit of sharing everything, believing that expression is always a path to clarity. But sometimes the opposite is true. There is wisdom in restraint, in knowing which words deserve to be spoken and which are better left unsaid. The journey of life is not about how much we share, but about how deeply we understand. There is a balance to be found, a middle path between speaking and silence. And when we learn to walk it, we step into a life that is richer, lighter, and more at peace. Regret is one of the heaviest burdens a person can carry. It lingers in the mind, replaying past mistakes, whispering what-ifs and should-haves, dragging the soul backward when it longs to move forward. The past cannot be undone, yet so many remain trapped in its shadow, unable to free themselves from the weight of their own memories. The choices made, the words spoken, the actions taken, each one carved into time, unchangeable. And yet, the mind clings to them, reliving moments long gone, as if doing so could alter their outcome. But the Buddha's wisdom reminds us that holding on to regret is like holding on to fire. It only burns the one who refuses to let go. It is easy to talk about past mistakes, to bring them up in conversation, to seek comfort in others by sharing every failure, every misstep. But what does it truly bring? Speaking of regrets too often does not release them. It feeds them. It keeps them alive, strengthens their grip, and prevents true healing. There is a difference between learning from the past and being chained to it. True wisdom is not in reliving old wounds, but in carrying forward the lessons they taught without carrying their weight. Regret should not be a prison, it should be a stepping stone. When spoken, let it be in a way that uplifts, that teaches, that allows others to grow from what was once a burden. But beyond that, let it rest, let it fade, because in the end, no amount of words can change what has already been lived. Only the present moment holds that power. There is a rare and quiet kind of peace that exists beyond the noise of the world. It is not found in external comforts or in the approval of others, but within, in the stillness of the heart. And yet, it is fragile. A single harsh word, a single moment of doubt, a single glance from another can shake it if it is not guarded carefully. People seek peace, but few understand how easily it can be disturbed. Every conversation, every interaction, every moment spent in the presence of another carries the potential to disrupt the calm one has worked so hard to build. It does not take much, just a careless comment, an opinion offered too freely, an expectation imposed without thought. To constantly share one's thoughts, emotions, and dreams with others is to hand over the key to inner peace. Every word spoken, every feeling exposed, becomes vulnerable to the influence of those who hear it. Some will understand, but many will not. Some will support, but others may sow doubt, fear, or jealousy. And in seeking validation from others, peace is often the price paid. The Buddha's wisdom teaches that true peace is not in the absence of noise, but in detachment from it. It is not found in avoiding people or shutting out the world, but in learning how to move through it without being moved by it. Peace should be guarded like something sacred, protected from the winds of outside influence. This does not mean shutting others out, but choosing wisely what is shared and with whom. It means understanding that not every thought needs to be spoken, not every feeling needs to be explained, not every dream needs to be announced. When peace is kept within, when it is nurtured in silence, it grows stronger. It becomes unshakable, untouched by the fleeting opinions of the world. And in that strength, there is true freedom. The world measures success in possessions, in achievements, in the things that can be seen and counted. A new home, a luxury car, a title earned through years of effort. These are the markers of accomplishment, the signs that one has made it. And so, people share these things openly, displaying them proudly. Believing that success is meant to be celebrated in the eyes of others. But Buddhism teaches that true success is not in what is owned, but in what is felt. It is not in wealth, but in contentment, not in status, but in purpose. And the more one clings to material success, the more one risks losing sight of what truly matters. To share too much about wealth and possessions is to invite envy, comparison, and false attachments. The joy of acquiring something new is fleeting, yet the burden of maintaining an image can last far longer. A person who is attached to their wealth is never truly free, for they fear its loss. And a person who constantly speaks of what they own may find that their value becomes tied to those things rather than to who they truly are. The Buddha reminds us that attachment leads to suffering, and nowhere is this more evident than in the pursuit of material wealth. The greatest achievements are not in what is owned, but in what is given. The richest person is not the one with the most possessions, but the one who has found contentment with little. Success is not in the things one acquires, but in the peace one carries, the kindness one shares, the wisdom one gains. And when success is measured in these terms, there is no need to announce it to the world. True success speaks for itself, not through words, but through the quiet strength of a life well lived. The mind is a vast and fertile ground, capable of growing both flowers and thorns. Every thought planted within it takes root, some bringing beauty, others bringing suffering. The Buddha once said that the greatest harm does not come from enemies outside, but from the unguarded thoughts within. And yet many allow negativity to flourish unchecked. They speak of their worries, their frustrations, their complaints, unaware that each word spoken is another seed planted in the mind. To focus on the negative is to water those seeds, to nurture them, to allow them to grow into something far greater than they ever needed to be. It is easy to speak of what is wrong, to complain about life's difficulties, to criticize others for their flaws. But what is gained from this? Words are powerful. They have the ability to build, but also the power to destroy. And once spoken, they cannot be taken back. To speak without thought is to scatter seeds carelessly, not knowing what will grow. The Buddha's wisdom teaches that speech should be used with care, to heal, to inspire, to bring peace rather than suffering. Before speaking, it is worth pausing to ask, does this thought bring clarity, or does it create more pain? Does it build, or does it break? And if the words do not bring something good into the world, perhaps silence is the wiser choice. The mind is a garden, and the thoughts spoken aloud are the seeds that shape it. Choose carefully what is planted, and watch as peace begins to bloom. There is a quiet strength in knowing when to hold back words, in understanding that not everything must be spoken, that not every thought must be shared. The Buddha once spoke of right speech, not just the act of speaking truthfully, but the wisdom of knowing when silence is the greater truth. In a world where people feel the need to express every passing thought, every emotion, every moment of joy or struggle, silence has become rare. Yet, it is within silence that the deepest wisdom is found. Words once spoken cannot be unspoken. A careless remark, an angry response, a moment of frustration released through speech can leave wounds far deeper than any physical harm. The mind moves faster than the tongue, but when we slow down and choose our words carefully, we begin to see the weight they carry. Every conversation is a reflection of the self. A person who constantly complains reveals the turmoil within them. A person who speaks with kindness reflects the peace they have cultivated inside. And a person who chooses silence over unnecessary words demonstrates mastery over their emotions. The Buddha taught that the wise do not waste words. They speak when there is something meaningful to say, and they remain silent when words would only add to the noise. This does not mean suppressing thoughts or emotions, but rather choosing carefully what is worth sharing. There is no need to explain oneself to everyone, no need to justify every action, no need to seek validation through speech. True understanding does not come from how much we say, but from the depth of what we choose to say. And sometimes the most profound understanding comes from saying nothing at all. There is a tendency among people to seek approval, to want to be understood, to feel the need to explain their choices to others. But the Buddha reminds us, do not speak unless it improves upon the silence. Too often, people waste energy trying to convince others of their worth, defending their dreams, explaining their beliefs. But what is the purpose of this? The truth does not need defending. A tree does not explain why it grows. The sun does not justify why it rises. They simply exist, and their existence is enough. When a person lives with confidence in their own truth, they no longer feel the need to announce it to the world. They no longer seek external validation. They no longer waste energy on convincing those who will not understand. Wisdom is not found in endless arguments, in proving oneself to others, in defending one's path. It is found in walking that path with quiet strength, knowing that the only approval that matters is one's own. Those who understand will never need an explanation, and those who demand one will never truly listen. Happiness is often misunderstood. People chase it as if it is something to be captured, as if it exists outside of themselves. They believe that once they achieve something, wealth, love, recognition, then they will be happy. But the Buddha's wisdom reveals a different truth. There is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path. It is not found in the future. It is not something that arrives once life is perfect. It exists only in this moment, in the way we choose to experience life as it is. But many people do not understand this. They place conditions on their happiness, attaching it to achievements, to external circumstances, to the approval of others. And in doing so, they place their peace in the hands of things beyond their control. The moment one ties their happiness to something external, they create suffering. Because nothing in life is permanent. People change, circumstances shift, wealth comes and goes. And if happiness depends on these things, then it will always be fragile, always at risk of being lost. True happiness is not in what one has, but in what one is. It is in contentment with the present moment, in gratitude for what already exists, in the ability to find joy in the simplest things. A quiet morning, a deep breath, the warmth of the sun on one's face. It is in understanding that peace is not something given by the world, but something created within. And when happiness is found in this way, it cannot be taken away by change, by loss, by anything outside of oneself. The greatest wealth is not in material possessions, but in the ability to be at peace with little. The Buddha once told the story of a man who lived in a grand palace, surrounded by luxury, yet he was restless, always wanting more. One day he met a monk who owned nothing but a robe and a bowl, yet he was at peace. The man asked the monk, "How can you be happy when you have nothing?" The monk smiled and replied, "Because I have everything I need." This is the wisdom that many fail to see. The more one owns, the more one fears losing. The more one chases, the more restless they become. True freedom is not in possessing more, but in needing less. It is in releasing attachment, in understanding that nothing external can ever bring lasting peace. And when one learns to let go, to live with simplicity, they discover a joy that is deeper than anything wealth can offer. The mind is a powerful force. It can be one's greatest ally or one's worst enemy. The Buddha teaches that suffering does not come from what happens in life, but from the mind's response to it. A person who is insulted may feel anger, yet another may feel nothing at all. A person who loses something valuable may grieve for years, while another accepts it and moves forward. The event is the same, but the reaction is different, and in this reaction lies the difference between peace and suffering. To master the mind is to master life. A person who controls their thoughts, who does not allow negativity to take root, who understands that emotions are temporary and need not dictate actions, is a person who is truly free. They do not react blindly. They do not let circumstances dictate their happiness. They do not allow others to disturb their peace. They observe, they reflect, and they choose their response with wisdom. The Buddha once compared the mind to a monkey, restless, always jumping from one thought to another, never still. Most people allow this monkey to control them, to dictate their emotions, to lead them into suffering. But the wise learn to tame the mind, to bring it into stillness, to recognize that they are not their thoughts, they are the awareness behind them, and in this awareness they find a peace that cannot be shaken by the storms of life. There is a difference between knowing and understanding. Many people read wise words, listen to profound teachings, agree with great truths, yet their lives do not change. This is because wisdom is not something to be collected, it is something to be lived. It is not in what is heard, but in what is practiced. The Buddha's teachings are not meant to be admired from a distance. They are meant to be walked step by step through daily life. It is easy to speak of patience. But the test comes in moments of frustration. It is easy to agree that attachment leads to suffering, but the real lesson is in letting go when life demands it. It is easy to talk about inner peace, but it is only real when it remains unshaken in the face of hardship. Wisdom is not in words, it is in action. And the greatest transformation happens not when one seeks more knowledge, but when one begins to apply the knowledge they already have. A person may read about peace for years, but if they do not practice stillness, they will never find it. A person may believe in kindness, but if they do not act with compassion, their belief is meaningless. The path is walked not through words, but through living. And when one truly begins to live these teachings, not just understand them, but embody them, they find that the answers they have been searching for were never far away. They were always within. A tree does not concern itself with the opinion of the wind. It does not bend for approval, nor does it resist when the seasons change. It simply stands, rooted in the earth, growing in silence, unaffected by what passes through its branches. And yet, human beings are not like the tree. They are swayed by words, shaken by criticism, disturbed by the opinions of others. They search for validation outside of themselves, as if their worth is something to be granted by the world rather than something inherent within. The Buddha once said, "If you propose to speak, always ask yourself, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind?" Yet many speak without such reflection, offering opinions that are neither requested nor valuable, criticizing what they do not understand, judging what they have no right to judge. And those who listen, who allow these words to take root in their minds, find themselves trapped, questioning their worth, doubting their path, seeking approval that was never needed. But a person who is truly free does not live according to the judgment of others. They do not explain themselves. They do not seek permission. They do not let outside voices dictate their journey. It is a great mistake to believe that everyone must understand you. The truth is, not everyone will. Not everyone will see the depth of your thoughts, the purpose behind your choices, the reasons for your silence. And that is fine. A river does not stop flowing because someone does not understand its path. The sun does not cease to shine because someone complains of its heat. To live freely is to move beyond the need to be understood, beyond the need to be accepted, beyond the illusion that one's worth is determined by the perception of others. But freedom is not only about detachment from judgment, it is also about detachment from praise. Many believe that suffering comes only from criticism, but attachment to approval is just as dangerous. To become addicted to compliments, to live for recognition, to base one's happiness on being admired, is to build a fragile existence. What is given today can be taken away tomorrow. What is celebrated in one moment may be forgotten in the next. A person who depends on the admiration of others will forever be at the mercy of their changing opinions. But a person who finds fulfillment within does not need applause to feel complete. The Buddha's wisdom teaches that true confidence is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It does not waver when unacknowledged. A wise person does not need to prove their intelligence. A truly kind person does not need to declare their kindness. A peaceful person does not need to convince others that they are at peace. Their actions speak louder than their words. Their presence carries the truth of who they are, with no need for validation. Yet, in this world, people waste much of their energy trying to prove themselves, trying to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged. But to what end? A flower does not bloom so that others may admire it. It blooms because that is its nature, and so too must a person live. Not to impress, not to seek approval, but simply to be. When this truth is understood, life becomes lighter. The need for validation disappears. The weight of opinions vanishes, and what remains is a life lived in true freedom. But this freedom is not easily found, for the mind is not easily tamed. The Buddha reminds us, it is a man's own mind, not his enemy or foe, that lures him to evil ways. Many believe their suffering comes from external circumstances, from misfortune, from the actions of others, from the hardships of life. But suffering is born in the mind. It is not the event itself that creates pain, but the story we tell ourselves about it. Two people may face the same loss, yet one carries grief for a lifetime while the other moves forward in peace. Two people may hear the same insult, yet one is filled with anger while the other remains unaffected. Two people may encounter the same challenge, yet one sees it as an obstacle while the other sees it as an opportunity. The difference is not in what happens, it is in how the mind interprets it, and in this understanding lies the key to liberation. To master the mind is to master life. To control one's thoughts is to control one's emotions. To see through illusions is to break free from suffering. But this mastery does not come easily. The mind is like an untamed horse. It resists, it fights, it runs wild. It jumps from thought to thought, from past to future, from worry to desire, never still, never at rest. And so, most people remain prisoners to their own thoughts, allowing them to dictate their emotions, their actions, their reality. But the wise know that the mind is not to be fought, it is to be understood. One does not control the waves by resisting them, but by learning to move with them. One does not silence the wind by shouting at it, but by listening to its song. In the same way, one does not master the mind through force, but through awareness. To observe without reacting, to witness thoughts without becoming attached to them, to see emotions arise and fall like the tide, knowing that none of them are permanent. When this is learned, life changes. Anger no longer takes hold, fear no longer controls, worry no longer consumes, because the mind is no longer the master, it becomes the servant. It follows the will of awareness, rather than dragging awareness into suffering. And in this state, true peace is found. But peace does not mean passivity. Many believe that to be at peace is to avoid struggle, to escape hardship, to withdraw from the world. But the Buddha's teachings reveal that true peace exists within action, within engagement, within the challenges of life. A wise person does not seek to avoid difficulty, they meet it with clarity. They do not run from conflict, they handle it with wisdom. They do not fear hardship, they embrace it as part of the journey. To be calm in still waters is easy, but to remain steady in a storm is the true test of wisdom. A person who has found true peace is not shaken by life's changes. They are not disturbed by loss, nor are they intoxicated by gain. They move through the world as the sky moves through the seasons, unchanged in its essence, though everything around it shifts. This is the peace that is unbreakable, the strength that is unwavering, the wisdom that is timeless. And so, the journey is not to escape life, but to walk through it with awareness. Not to silence the mind, but to understand it. Not to seek approval, but to live in one's own truth. The Buddha's teachings are not about retreating from the world, but about learning how to move through it without being moved by it. A person who has found this way does not need to prove anything. They do not need to explain, to defend, to seek validation. They simply live. And in that simplicity, they find what so many are searching for: a life of meaning, a life of freedom, a life of peace. A river does not ask where it must flow, nor does it hesitate before moving forward. It simply follows its nature, adapting to the landscape, carving its path with patience, never rushing, never resisting. The river knows no fear, no doubt, no hesitation. It exists in a state of perfect acceptance, flowing effortlessly toward wherever life carries it. But human beings are different. They hesitate at the crossroads of life, paralyzed by uncertainty, burdened by the fear of making the wrong choice. They resist change, clinging to what is familiar, afraid of the unknown. Yet, in this resistance, they suffer. The Buddha once said, "You only lose what you cling to." These words hold a truth that many refuse to accept. Suffering does not come from change itself, but from the refusal to accept it. The seasons do not grieve when the leaves fall from the trees, nor does the night resist when the sun rises. Change is not a tragedy. It is the rhythm of life, the movement of existence, the very nature of all things. And yet, humans resist it, holding on to what must be released, fearing what must come, convinced that stability is found in keeping things the same. But nothing stays the same. To fight against this truth is to fight against life itself. The mind clings to the past, replaying old memories, reliving moments that have long since passed, wishing they could be changed or preserved. But the past is a river that has already flowed. No amount of thought, no amount of regret No amount of wishing can bring back what is gone. And yet, people imprison themselves in their memories, reliving old pains, carrying the weight of what can no longer be altered. But why carry what can no longer serve? Why suffer for what is already beyond reach? The Buddha teaches that to live in the past is to miss the present, to be trapped in what no longer exists while life continues to move forward without us. But just as the past can trap the mind, so too can the future. People spend their days worrying about what has not yet come, fearing outcomes that may never arrive, preparing for disasters that may never occur. They fill their minds with anxiety, believing that by thinking, by planning, by controlling, they can shape the future to their will. But the future is like the sky, unpredictable, uncontrollable, beyond the reach of even the most careful planning. To fear it is to fear a shadow, to be imprisoned by something that has not yet even arrived. The wise do not dwell in what is gone, nor do they live in fear of what is yet to come. They exist fully in the present, understanding that this moment is the only moment that is real. The past is but a memory, the future but a dream. Only the now is alive. Only the now is within our grasp. To truly live is to let go of all that is beyond our control, to embrace what is before us, to move with life rather than against it. Yet, even as people learn to let go of time, they often fail to let go of attachment. The Buddha warns that attachment leads to suffering. This does not mean one must not love, must not care, must not form connections, but love that is built on attachment is not love, it is possession. And possession breeds fear, for what is possessed can be lost. A person who loves with attachment does not simply love. They hold, they control, they depend, believing that happiness comes from having, from keeping, from never letting go. But nothing in life can be kept forever. Not people, not moments, not even the self we believe ourselves to be. Everything is in motion. To try and freeze what is meant to flow is to create suffering. True love is not in possession, but in freedom. To love fully is to love without fear. To cherish the moment without demanding that it lasts forever. To embrace without needing to hold. To care without needing to control. Love in its purest form is a gift, not a transaction. It asks nothing, expects nothing, fears nothing. It simply is. And in this love, there is no suffering, for there is no clinging, only the acceptance of what is for as long as it is meant to be. Yet, even with this understanding, many find it difficult to detach because they mistake attachment for meaning. They believe that without clinging, life will be empty, that without desire, there will be no joy, that without struggle, there will be no purpose. But the Buddha's teachings reveal a greater truth, that the deepest fulfillment is not in chasing but in being. A flower does not strive to bloom, it simply does. A bird does not chase the wind, it moves with it. Life is not about what is held onto, but about what is lived. And when this is understood, a great burden is lifted. Peace is found not in having more, not in knowing more, not in achieving more, but in needing less. The Buddha reminds us, health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth, faithfulness the best relationship. In these words lies the secret to true fulfillment. A person who is content needs nothing more to be happy. A person who is at peace does not require life to be different. A person who trusts in the unfolding of existence is free from the need to control, but the mind, left unchecked, resists this wisdom. It seeks more, always more. It convinces itself that happiness lies just beyond reach, in the next goal, the next achievement, the next possession, the next moment. And so, people chase endlessly, believing that peace is somewhere in the distance. But no matter how much they attain, peace does not arrive, because peace was never something to be found outside of themselves. It was always within, waiting to be uncovered, waiting to be chosen. To live fully is to see the illusion of desire for what it is, to understand that the things we chase are not the source of happiness, but the distraction from it. A person who believes they need wealth will never feel they have enough. A person who believes they need love to be whole will always feel incomplete. A person who ties their worth to success will forever be afraid of failure. But a person who sees that they are already enough, already complete, already whole, no longer needs to chase. They walk through life with lightness, with joy, with the quiet knowledge that nothing is missing. The Buddha once told the story of a man who searched the world for treasure, believing that somewhere he would find a jewel that would bring him eternal happiness. He traveled across mountains, through forests, over vast deserts, always searching, always longing, always believing that the next place, the next discovery, the next moment would be the one. But after years of searching, he returned home, exhausted and empty-handed. And there, buried beneath his own house, was the jewel he had been searching for all along. So it is with peace, so it is with happiness. The answers are not in the future. They are not in another place, another person, another life. They are here. They are now. They have always been within us, waiting to be seen. And when this is understood, the search ends. Not because there is nothing left to find, but because everything we were looking for was never lost. A flame does not resist the wind. It dances, bends, flickers, but never clings to the air that moves around it. And yet, human beings cling to thoughts, to desires, to fears, to things that no longer serve them. They hold on to pain as if it defines them, onto people as if they will never leave, onto identities that have long since faded. But what is held too tightly becomes a source of suffering. A hand clenched in a fist cannot receive, just as a heart filled with attachment cannot find peace. The Buddha once said, "Let go or be dragged." These words carry a truth that many refuse to accept. People cling to relationships that have run their course, believing that holding on will somehow bring back what is lost. They dwell on past mistakes, convinced that if they replay them enough times, they will find a way to change what has already happened. They worry endlessly about the future, as if fear could somehow prevent the unknown from unfolding. But in all this clinging, they only create their own suffering. Life is not meant to be gripped. It is meant to be experienced, moment by moment, without the weight of the past or the burden of the future. Yet the mind resists this wisdom. It seeks certainty, believing that control is the key to peace. But the greatest illusion is that control exists at all. No matter how carefully one plans, no matter how much one prepares, life moves as it will. The river does not ask where it will flow. The wind does not seek permission to change direction. Life unfolds according to its own nature, beyond the grasp of human will. And in this realization, there is great freedom. To let go is not to give up. It is to trust, to understand that not everything needs to be held, that not every question needs an answer, that not every moment needs to be controlled. But letting go does not mean becoming indifferent. It does not mean closing the heart, retreating from love, refusing to feel. It means loving without attachment, without fear, without the need to possess. True love is not in holding on. It is in allowing others to be free. A bird does not love the sky by trying to capture it. A flower does not love the sun by demanding that it never set. Love, in its purest form, is without conditions, without expectations, without need. It simply is. And in this love, there is no suffering, because there is no fear of loss. The Buddha taught that pain is certain, but suffering is optional. This teaching reveals a profound truth. Suffering is not in the experience, but in the mind's resistance to it. A person who loses something valuable will feel pain, but whether that pain turns into suffering depends on whether they accept or resist what has happened. The world is filled with people carrying burdens they do not need to carry, grieving losses they have not truly lost, fearing things that have not yet come. But what if they simply let go? What if they accepted that pain is part of life, but suffering is a choice? What if, instead of trying to change what cannot be changed, they chose to move forward? To live in this way requires a deep shift in perspective. It requires seeing life not as a series of things to hold on to, but as a flow to move with. A wise person does not try to freeze the river. They step into it, allowing the current to carry them. They do not fight against the wind. They move with it, adjusting their path as needed. This is the way of peace, not resistance, not control, but trust in the unfolding of life. And yet, even as people learn to let go, they must also learn another lesson, the lesson of presence. The Buddha reminds us, the trouble is, you think you have time. People live as if life is endless, as if there will always be another day to love, another moment to appreciate, another chance to live fully. They postpone happiness, believing that once they achieve something, once they acquire more, once they reach a certain point, then they will be happy. But life is not something to be prepared for, it is something to be lived now. A person who is always waiting for the right moment will find that the moment never comes. A person who is always planning for the future will find that the present has passed them by. The wise understand that this moment, this breath, this step, this heartbeat is all that is guaranteed. And so they live not in the past, not in the future, but fully in the now. They do not delay joy. They do not postpone peace. They do not wait for life to from what was to what might be. It is rarely still, rarely quiet. The Buddha compared the mind to a monkey, always moving, always reaching, always unsettled. And yet, just as a monkey can be tamed with patience, so too can the mind be trained to be at peace. Through awareness, through mindfulness, through the simple act of observing without reacting, the mind can be brought into stillness. To sit in silence, to listen to the breath, to observe thoughts without becoming lost in them. This is the practice of presence. It is not something that happens instantly. It is a discipline, a way of being that must be cultivated moment by moment. But as the mind becomes quieter, as awareness deepens, a great transformation begins. Worries lose their power, fear fades, the weight of unnecessary thoughts disappears, and what remains is something pure, an existence unburdened, a life lived with clarity, a peace that is not dependent on external conditions. And so, the journey is not about escaping life, but about fully embracing it. Not about achieving more, but about needing less. Not about controlling, but about trusting. The Buddha's teachings are not rules to follow, but invitations to see life differently, to step out of suffering, to release what is not needed, to walk with lightness through the world. A person who understands this does not cling to anything, yet they lose nothing. They love deeply, yet they are not afraid of loss. They experience pain, yet they do not suffer. They live fully, yet they do not fear death. This is the path of wisdom, not a life without difficulty, but a life without unnecessary struggle. And in this way, they are free. Not because they have escaped life, but because they have finally learned how to live it. A candle does not fear being consumed by its own flame. It simply burns, giving light without hesitation, without expectation, without demanding anything in return. And yet, human beings struggle with this simplicity. They give, but they expect. They love, but they fear. they act, but they seek rewards. The Buddha once said, "The root of suffering is attachment." And nowhere is this more evident than in the way people attach themselves to their own actions, believing that everything they do must yield something in return. But the truth is, life does not work this way. Not every kindness is repaid. Not every effort is recognized. Not every love is returned. And if happiness depends on receiving something in exchange for what is given, then happiness will always be fragile, always at risk of being taken away. The wise do not give because they expect. They give because it is their nature. Just as the sun shines without asking for gratitude, just as the river flows without needing thanks. Those who understand the nature of life give freely, love freely, act freely, without attachment to the outcome. Yet, detachment does not mean indifference. Many misunderstand this teaching, believing that to let go of attachment is to stop caring, to stop feeling, to become cold, distant, withdrawn. But this is not wisdom. This is avoidance. True detachment is not about closing the heart. It is about opening it so fully that it no longer fears loss. To love without attachment is to love fully, without needing to own, without needing to control, without fearing the impermanence of what is given. It is to love in the same way that a flower blooms, not because it demands admiration, but simply because it is its nature to do so. But most people do not live in this way. They love with conditions. They give with expectations. They seek happiness in things that are bound to change. And when things do not go as they hoped, they suffer. The Buddha teaches, you only lose what you cling to. A person who clings to wealth will fear its loss. A person who clings to approval will suffer when it is taken away. A person who clings to the idea of who they should be will struggle when life leads them in a different direction. But a person who clings to nothing loses nothing, because they understand that nothing was ever truly theirs to begin with. And in this understanding, there is freedom. Yet even as people learn to let go of their attachments, they must also learn another great lesson, the lesson of stillness. The world is always in motion. There is always something happening, always something to chase, always something to react to. But the wise understand that not everything requires a reaction. Not every thought must be followed. Not every emotion must be acted upon. Not every situation must be controlled. There is great power in stillness, in the ability to observe without being swept away, to witness without being consumed, to be present without being lost in the movement of the world. The Buddha once told the story of a man standing by a river. The water rushed past him, filled with fallen leaves, broken branches, passing debris. Most people, he said, are like those leaves, swept away by the current.